Proportional representation versus first-past-the-post voting.
Not every nation votes the way the United States does. We use a thing called first-past-the-post. This means that for every legislative seat, every seat in Congress, there's a single contest, and whomever wins that contest wins that seat in the legislature. It's a simple system. Each electoral contest is a separate vote. If it were a carton of eggs, each egg would be a separate election. Other nations use a system called proportional representation. In proportional representation, instead of having a series of single elections not grouped together, in proportional representation, you take a whole set of seats and you batch them together into one group, and then there's an election within that batch or group or region, and whatever percentage of the vote that each party got within that region, they would get that percentage of the seats in the legislature. So instead of having it be single little elections, it's a batch election where the seats are divided up proportionally based on the percentage of the vote each party got.
The U.S. first-past-the-post system. Single-member plurality voting, in other words. This is the map of the United States showing all 435 electoral districts for congressional seats. And as you can see, some of the seats are very large, or some of the districts are very large, like all of Wyoming, all of Montana, and some of them are very tiny, like in New York and around LA and San Francisco, where a lot of people live. My home state, Washington State, has 10 congressional districts, and again, you can see sparsely populated areas like District 4 there right in the middle are pretty huge, and then there are some tiny geographic districts like number 7 around Seattle where a ton of people live, in fact the same number of people as in number 4. In New Mexico, with a single large city, Albuquerque, there might be only 3 districts, all with basically equal numbers of people in them. New Mexico District 1 seems small geographically, but it contains Albuquerque and has as many people as District 2 or District 3.
First past the post is a very simple system that worked great in pre-electronic times. Each district holds its own elections, and the elections and all the ballots are very local. The local representatives then go to the state or national legislature, take their seats, and begin legislating, begin governing. But there are some inherent flaws to the first past the post system.
The key issue is that first past the post makes it very hard for there to be more than 2 political parties. Since whichever candidate gets the most votes wins, third-party candidates tend to be spoilers. Third-party candidates often take votes from the party they are most similar to, thus helping the party they most oppose. The Green Party in the U.S. is a great example of this, since right now, in 2020, the U.S. Democratic Party is clearly more aligned with environmental issues than the Republican Party is. It would be self-destructive for U.S. environmentalists to create a third party focusing on the environment. No matter how frustrated with the Democratic Party voters for whom environmental protection is a key issue may be, if they split off from the Democrats, they will simply deny the Democrats enough votes that the Republicans win the elections. For example, if the Democrats get 45% of the vote, the Greens 8%, and the Republicans 47%, the Republican candidate would win the seat. 53% of the voters would have opposed the Republicans, but the Republicans would win the plurality of the vote. Anti-abortion activists, religious conservatives, never-Trump Republicans, and others face similar problems in the U.S. Republican Party. If they create third parties, they simply end up handing the Democrats power. Thus, first-past-the-post electoral systems tend to be dominated by just 2 political parties, no matter how large or diverse a country may be. The simple mathematical logic of first-past-the-post forces diverse people to settle for just 2 party choices. This is particularly true in the United States. First-past-the-post also tends to result in a jarring, flippy-floppy sort of political culture. The Democrats win one year and are thrown out in the next cycle when the voters choose more Republicans. Politics slosh confusingly from left to right and back again.
Interestingly, this means that primary voting, the voting in the election before the general election, is often more important than the general election in many U.S. states. In Democratic-leaning districts, Republicans really are not going to win the general election. Their votes, honestly, don't much matter. Thus, the really important election is the primary election, where the Democrats decide amongst themselves which Democrat is going to beat the Republican candidate. The same is also true in Wyoming or Kansas, but reversed. The Republicans are going to win in those states. And so the Democratic primary is kind of interesting, the general election is kind of interesting, but where the real matter is in the Republican primary, because that's going to decide who actually wins in the general election in those 2 states.
Proportional representation. In electoral systems that use proportional representation, the math does not create pressure that forces smaller parties to give up. Voters tend to get more choices. Usually, these systems do have some limits to keep there from being too many political parties. They might, for instance, say that any party not receiving at least 5% of the vote does not get seats. Here's an example using my home state of Washington. So imagine one election for the whole state with all 10 seats up for grabs. The 10 seats would be divided amongst the party's candidates based on what percentage of the total vote each party received. The Democrats got 40% of the vote, the Republicans 30%, the Conservative Party 10%, the Greens 10%, and the United Tribal Parties 10%. The seats would be shared out proportionally. Of the 10 total seats, the Democrats would get 4 seats, the Republicans would get 3 seats, the Conservative Party gets 1 seat, the Greens would get 1 seat, and the UTP would get 1 seat. In order to figure out who actually got those seats, voters do a sort of two-part voting, picking the ballot of their party to decide what percentage of the vote their party will get. On that ballot, they then vote for which party candidates within their chosen party they want to send to the legislature, depending on how many seats they get in the proportional part of the election. Because there are more parties, it is rare for one party to win enough seats to actually control the legislature or government outright. As a result, parties tend to have to band together to form coalitions. Thus, 3 parties might come together to run a state or nation's government. In order to do this, the parties often divide up the elements of government. These are often called ministries. The Greens in a coalition might want to control the environmental ministry, while a small moderate party might be given control of the finance ministry in exchange for joining the governing coalition. Compromise has to be baked into the system. The key weakness is that any given election might fail to produce a result. If parties cannot agree to form a working coalition capable of winning votes in the legislature, new elections are required to try and break the deadlock. This can be annoying, or it can be catastrophic, depending on the socioeconomic situation of the nation at that time.
What I have just presented is a very idealized version of proportional representation. There is no single perfect system for elections. Many countries incorporate parts of both systems. That said, proportional representation does tend to provide more choices to voters, and it can occasionally fail. You can get an election that doesn't produce a possible coalition to run the country. In that case, elections are held again immediately, and a caretaker government runs things until that's complete, and they just try again. First past the post will not have the failed election problem. Someone always wins. And however, the problem there is that realistically, voters only get 2 choices. There's little compromise, and there's little incentive for there to be bipartisanship. Politics tend to be brutal and partisan. The Democrats hate the Republicans, and the Republicans hate the Democrats. It's easier to win an election by demonizing your enemy than it is by explaining your policies are a little bit better than the other guy's policies. Most voters, in the end, in a first-past-the-post system, don't really vote for who they want. They vote against the person they don't want in power. That's primarily the strength of proportional representation. You vote for a party you actually want to vote for.